forged on the gridiron in September. Perfected in the magic of March. For the fans who love the crunch of the pads, prefer a dunk, and expect nothing but the best. It's Bigger 10. Here's Steve Dace.
Indeed, the madness has arrived. Welcome to what is perennially one among our favorite episodes we do each and every year, right here on Bigger 10. I am Steve Dace with my co-host, never partner, Aaron McIntyre. We are on the brink of spring, although it feels more like winter in Iowa right now and spring like back in February. But we are on the brink of spring. We're having, I think, the latest March Madness tip in the history of the NCAA tournament. It's close. Yeah. But nevertheless, the wait is over, Aaron, and neither one of our favorite teams will be involved. But I got to tell you, that really hasn't sullied my enthusiasm for the event one iota. That's how much I love the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, I mean, it's time off as well, so vacation, looking forward to that a little bit too. So it's always fun. It always delivers. We sit here and we pontificate beforehand, and we try to figure out, how are things going to shake out this year? What are the big upsets? And, we have our brackets busted, by about, 1 Central Time on Thursday. It always happens, it seems like. But at the end of the day, you look back and say, man alive, that was a great tournament again.
So we had a 2-part episode here. In part 2, you and I are going to give our bracket predictions, how we think things are going to go here over the next few weeks. Before we get there, we're going to get into my bracket tips. Now, before we start going through those, a caveat, and I want to get your take on this, Aaron. So I started using these trends 6 years ago. In the first 5 years I used these trends, Aaron, I finished no lower than in the 92nd percentile at ESPN.com. In fact, I had one run where I had 13 of the 14 teams that made it to the national championship game. So yeah, I did this for about 7 years, I should say, okay? Last year, these trends were a disaster. We had San Diego State, Florida Atlantic in the Final Four, Creighton in the Elite Eight. And so what we don't know yet is we're seeing the transfer portal in college football work opposite, where you're seeing essentially now group of 5 programs are basically just feeder systems for the big schools to come and take their best players every year.
Yep.
And the quality of play in conferences like CUSA and the MAC is way lower than it used to be. I wonder in basketball, because you can only play 5 guys at a time, are we seeing actually the transfer portal more democratizing things, where now, hey, I can go make some money, play at Florida Atlantic, San Diego State. I don't have to be the 8th man at Kentucky, Kansas, Duke, North Carolina, Michigan, Indiana, etc. And was last year the harbinger of that? Or was it just simply when you play a single elimination event, you're going to have outlier results every few years? This year, I'm waiting to see if this happens 2 years in a row. And if it does, I may have to adjust my line of thinking, but that's kind of my meta caveat before we get to these trends. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I would say for now it's just an outlier, as you said. This could happen in this tournament every few years. So for now, it just needs to remain an outlier. I'm not totally sure if NIL and the Wild West of the transfer portal is necessarily driving this impact. I know they're kind of apples and oranges, but I've seen kind of the same thing. I betting on college basketball was the thing that I was the best at in terms of sports wagering, and the reason for that, my reckoning is that there's 300 some odd teams. There's no way the odds makers can keep up with all of these teams playing every single night. And so I would never bet like the big conferences. I'd always go down to the small conferences that get almost no action, and that's where I'd have my success. That has changed now, where all of the lines are tight. All of them, up and down the lineup every single night, they're tight. So I'm not sure what's driving that. I don't know if that's the public getting involved in sports wagering. I don't know if that's the odds makers, which would render this line of thinking moot as it pertains to the NCAA tournament. Or I don't know if maybe as you said, the democratization is driving all of that. So I think that kind of has to do with this conversation. I think we still need a few more years of sample size to make that conclusion. So for now, I'm just planting my flag as last year, in terms of these trends, in terms of these tips, that's just an outlier.
We'll see if you're right. I hope you're right, because that would mean the trends get to continue. And you're right about college basketball. I still finished on our Patreon page about 36 games over 500. Aaron, I had so many games where the result was blown in the last minute or two down to the last possession. I can't tell you how many of those kinds of games I lost this year. Otherwise, our Patreon supporters would have had a really good season instead of just a pretty decent one. But let's get to these bracket tips, all right? Before you fill out your bracket, make sure you acknowledge these trends. Number one, no team that lost its first game in its conference tournament has ever gone on to win the NCAA tournament. So this year, eliminate these 8 teams from winning the whole thing in alphabetical order: Alabama, Boise State, Duke, Kansas, Kentucky, Nevada, Tennessee, and Texas. Obviously, Aaron, there's some big names there.
Indeed. Kentucky, Kansas. I know some people are high on Kansas, and if they can get healthy all the way, yeah. And Tennessee, a lot of people are high on Tennessee. So those would be names that would be surprising. But again, this is an ironclad trend. So I think it's surprising when we go through these. It never ceases to amaze me how surprising some of these names are. So it's hard to do in your bracket. You read these tips like this, and then you go through and fill out your bracket and like, I can't pick Kansas, or I can't pick the fill in the blank team to lose to that team. So that's always a surprise when we go through these.
And remember, conference tournaments were introduced in the 60s, brother. So we're going on a half century of this trend.
Yeah.
Yep. All right, number 2. All but one national champion since 2002 was ranked, that's when Ken Pomeroy's analytics debuted, was ranked in the top 25 of both of KenPom's offensive and defensive efficiency ratings. This year, that is these 8 teams, again in alphabetical order: Arizona, Auburn, Connecticut, Creighton, Houston, Marquette, North Carolina, and Purdue. Duke and Tennessee are both close enough that with an extended run in the NCAA tournament, they would each cross this threshold. So chances are very, very high that your national champion is on that sheet right there, one of those 10 teams.
And we talked about this a few weeks ago. Is it just me, or are there a lot more teams on this trend? Because this is almost as good. Well, this is probably about as good.
It's gone down a little bit. It was 10 when we last talked about it. 6 or 8 has normally been about
That's
the right
what I
number.
thought. It's usually a little bit lower number, so that tells you about the parity in the sport this year.
Number 3, in the last 33 years, only 7 coaches have won it all in their first trip to the Final Four, although 3 of them have been the last 4 national champions. So keep that in mind. Of the coaches whose teams meet the aforementioned KenPom threshold, 5 of them have been to the Final Four before. Hubert Davis at North Carolina, Dan Hurley at Connecticut, Bruce Pearl at Auburn, Kelvin Sampson at Houston, and Shaka Smart at Marquette.
Wow. Marquette's kind of a surprising one right there. Thinking about going to the Final Four, I don't really see them in that vein, but that would be interesting.
Number 4, 25 of the last 32 teams, that's 78%, to make the Final Four were in the top 25 of KenPom's defensive efficiency ratings. This year, that's heading into the tournament. This year, that is these 17 teams in alphabetical order: Arizona, Auburn, Creighton, Connecticut, Houston, Iowa State, Kansas, Marquette, Michigan State, Mississippi State, New Mexico, North Carolina, Purdue, St. Mary's, San Diego State, Tennessee, and Virginia. Chances are there's at least 1, if not 2, Final Four teams right there.
Yeah, Houston, and then San Diego State's run. I know they're not on the. Oh no, they are on the list on this one. The style of play of both of those teams, which is just slow. I'll have a little trend to share with you when we unveil our brackets in a little bit. For whatever reason, and I think it's probably because of the environmental factors of playing in neutral site arenas and things like the balls, that they're playing with.
Different backgrounds.
Teams who play a slow pace of play are usually rewarded.
Wasn't the under something like a 75% trend in NCAA tournament games last year?
So
Oh, did I spoil your thing? I'm sorry. My bad. Okay. I didn't mean to step on your rake.
Yeah, it's not a big deal.
Okay.
But that's what I did, actually. I'm not betting necessarily sides. I did a round robin. I think it's a 3 or 4 pick round robin on every single first round game. Just betting the under.
I might follow you in that, actually. And doing it round robin, kind of like doing the old, that's the sports version of the exacta box in a horse race. Yep, I like that. You might have got me to follow your lead on that, brother. I appreciate that. Thank you. All right, number 5. In the last 8 years, 13 of the 16 teams, that's 81%, to make it to the national championship game ranked in the top 6 of the offensive efficiency metrics at Bart Torvik's website from February 1st through the end of the conference tournaments. Now, that stat was 93% until last year when it went 0 for 2 for the first time, okay? So this year, that is these 6 teams: Illinois, Connecticut, Gonzaga, Kentucky, Creighton, and Purdue. Alabama and Auburn are each less than a point behind, just like Connecticut and Miami were last year when they both made the Final Four and UConn won it all. So chances are your national champion or at least one of the teams in the national championship game is on that list.
I have 4 of those teams mentioned going pretty deep. 4 of those, I think, 6 teams that you mentioned going pretty deep. One of them I have losing in the first round.
Number 6, teams that rank top 25 in 2-point defense and outside the top 150 in 3-pointers attempted traditionally do well and overperform in the NCAA tournament. Although, again, I keep pointing out what an outlier last year was, but I think if we're going to be honest with people, we need to tell them this. Last year, only one of the 4 teams who met this criteria, Houston, even made it as far as the Sweet 16. And it would make sense, by the way, when you look at how many different styles you play in the NCAA tournament and how random 3-point makes are, that the less reliant you are on 3-pointers and the more solid and consistent you are defensively, the better you have to have a longer run in the tournament. This year, that is these 7 teams in alphabetical order: Auburn, Grand Canyon, Gonzaga, Houston, Kansas, North Carolina, and St. Mary's. Okay? But again, this trend bombed last year, like several of these trends did, in fact. Number 7, since 2002, when Ken Pomeroy's analytics debuted, only 2% of the teams, is that a trend? Only 2% of the teams to make the Final Four ranked in the top 10 of either KenPom's offensive and defensive efficiency, but then outside the top 50 of the other. Although, again, just to show what an outlier last year was, 2 teams, San Diego State and Miami, accomplished this just last year. Before last year, Aaron, it was 1%. Man. All right, with San Diego State and Miami, it went to 2%. That's how much of an outlier last year's tournament was. So that's why I'm anxious to see if this was a herald or it was just random. This year, you want to fade these 9 teams from getting that far based on this trend, which is a 98% trend. In alphabetical order: Alabama, Baylor, Illinois, Iowa State, Kansas, Kentucky, Michigan State, San Diego State, and Virginia. This 20-year system, 21-year system, well, 20, because we had the COVID year too, so that we didn't have a tournament. This 20-year system says 98% odds none of these teams I just mentioned will make the Final Four.
And I can see that with a few of them. I mean, some of these teams, you look at Iowa State, Kansas, Illinois, they have looked dang impressive. Kentucky has looked dang impressive, but then they've had some head scratching did you even show up tonight as well? So I think that kind of explains that.
All right, number 8.
This is interesting.
No team west of the Central Time Zone has won the NCAA tournament since 1997. That's the Final Four I went to for my bachelor party, right, by the way, in Indianapolis, Arizona, Minnesota, North Carolina, and Kentucky. That was Rick Pitino's last year. Arizona became, I think, the first team to beat all the other number 1 seeds to win it all. And I was at that Final Four. That's the last time a team west of the Central Time Zone won it all.
This doesn't make sense to me at all. I mean, maybe you can make sense of it. It's not as if we haven't had Final Fours in Mountain or Western Time Zone, have we? We've had them in
UCLA's been to several Final Fours. Arizona's been to several Final Fours.
Yeah, so it's not like the time change. It's just a really weird factoid, but it is what it is. It's a trend for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm. Number 9. Let's get to the actual brackets themselves now, okay? Round of 64 trends. Oh, can I mention a bonus one?
Go ahead.
By the way, 7 of the last 9 national champions were at-large teams, meaning teams that did not get an automatic bid by winning their conference tournament.
That's interesting.
And this year we had an all-time record, Aaron. 17 number 1 seeds did not win their conference tournament, all-time record.
Wow.
So chances are your national champion is also one of those at-large teams. All right, let's get to round by round. All right, so round of 64, which we used to call the first round. 16 seeds all-time are just 2 and 150. Although those 2 wins have come in the last 4 tournaments. All right. 15 seeds all time are just 11 and 141. You want to pick at least one 13 or 14 seed to win because at least one of them does that about 20% of the time. So that's with 4 brackets, that's an average of pretty close to 1 per tournament. 12 seeds have won at least 1 game 29 of the last 34 years. 9 seeds are almost exactly 500 against number 8 seeds. Anything stand out there to you at all?
Obviously, the 12 seed. It seems like we have multiple 12 seeds every single year. That's always kind of one of those sexy picks to make as one of your upsets. But it seems I don't know. This year it's a little bit more difficult. I think I only have one, if I remember right, I think I only have one 12 upset, but that would fit in line with that trend right there. And then I thought prior to 5-6 years ago, I thought we'd never see a 16 seed beat a 1 seed. But now it's happened and happened twice. So I don't know if we'll see that 2 years in a row, but that's that. If you would have told yourself 10 years ago we'd see 2 16 seeds, I mean, what would you have said? Get off.
Never in a million years. Yeah. Yep, never. All right, let's get to the round of 32. Pick all the number 1 seeds to advance to the Sweet 16, which they do over 90% of the time historically. Although, again, there's last year and that outlier again. Last year was the rare time that 2 of them did not. I think that's only happened like twice ever. Pick at least one double-digit seed to make it to the Sweet 16. This has happened 36 of the last 38 years.
That's hard to believe, but it does happen, it seems like, every year. And it's always the team you least expect. It's always the matchup you seemingly least expect.
St. Peter's a couple years ago.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. All right, Sweet 16 trends. Advance exactly 3 number 1 seeds to the Elite 8 because all-time number 1 seeds make it that far about 70% of the time, or almost 3 out of 4. Although the last 2 years, only 1 number 1 seed total, Aaron, total. The last 2 years, only 1 number 1 seed made it to the Elite 8 in the last 2 tournaments combined. Advance no team seeded lower than 11th because all time, only 3 of the 312 teams ever to make it to the Elite 8 were seeded that low. That's 0.9%. So that's a system, okay?
Yeah.
Kind of speaks for itself.
It's tempting, once you're filling out your brackets and like, oh, I like this matchup. I like this matchup. So all of a sudden you've got, a 13 seed in the Final Four, the Elite 8 or something like that. Maybe go back up and fix that a little bit.
St. Peter's would be the most recent example of that trend too. Yep. All right, for the Elite 8, advance either 1 or 2 number 1 seeds because 30 of the last 38 Final Fours, that's 79%, had exactly that many number 1 seeds, although last year was the rare time 0 number 1 seeds made it. Advance no double-digit seeds to the Final Four because all time since seeding began in 1979, only 6 of the 176 Final Four teams were seeded lower than 9th. That's only 3.4%, and a trend that, again, goes back to 1979.
I'm trying to think, was Loyola one of the last examples, or maybe it was St. Peter?
Loyola would be an example.
Yeah,
that was the last example. Yep. All right, number 13, Final Four trends. Advance no team seeded lower than 6th because only 3 times in the last 37 years has there been a national championship game with a team seeded lower than that. Number 1 seeds have squared off for the national title only 9 times ever. But 6 of those meetings have occurred in just the last 18 years. 34 of the last 35 national champions, including UConn a year ago, were seeded 4th or higher. 7 of the last 9 national champions were at-large teams. I mentioned that before we got started. Now, as we close this out, keep this in mind. Other than maybe the very first one about no one's ever won the tournament by winning their conference, not by losing the first game of their conference tournament. Other than that trend, maybe no other trend should be ever singled out. So that means what you're really looking for here are teams that check multiple boxes to either fade or follow. Okay, I absolutely would not go against the tournament on the conference tournament trend until I see somebody do that. Okay, because you're talking about this goes back to pre-shot clock, pre-3-point shot. You know, before
like
we had a
metaphysical
64-team tournament, you're going back to when John Wooden was still coaching. Okay, so I wouldn't go against that trend, but the rest of them, you're really looking to see who shows up in multiple trends when you're looking for teams to fade or follow, in my view.
Yeah, and then, I mean, you get to the point where you're at the Elite Eight, and that's when you can maybe rely on your own intuition a little bit more. Mm-hmm. But yeah, these, especially getting through the first couple of rounds, these trends are really going to be your friend. I hope, last year being the outlier, I think these trends are going to be your friend.
Yeah, I went from 94 percentile on ESPN.com to the 65% percentile last year.
Oh, so. No, a commoner.
That tells you how much these trends bombed a year ago, and we'll find out here in a matter of hours whether or not that was a herald to a new era to come, or just a random event that you'll get every now and then in a single elimination event. All right, we'll take a break. We'll come back. Aaron and I will lay out our bracket picks when we do. All right, back here on Bigger 10. Let's go through our brackets, Aaron. I will start putting these trends to good use. Let's see if they come through again for me as they have so many other times, or I fall on my flat on my face like I did a year ago. All right, let's start in the East region. I like UConn and Florida Atlantic to move on, two teams that made the Final Four a year ago. I'm going to take San Diego State, who's also was in the Final Four a year ago, against Auburn. One thing you're going to see in my bracket, Auburn. Why? I don't think there's any money to be made betting UConn in this tournament. They're the number one seed. They're the number one team. They're the defending national champion. I bet him weeks ago at like 7-1 to win it. I don't even know if you can get 4-1 right now. Okay, so I'm not going to win. What I would have to do to win a pool betting UConn would mean I'd have to dominate everywhere else because everyone's going to pick them, right?
Sure.
So what I like, the reason I like Auburn's analytics and UConn's are almost exactly the same. If you look at KenPom, if you look at the net ranking, they're almost exactly the same. Auburn played in a terrific league, the SEC. So I'm taking a flyer here with Auburn that I'm basically getting metrically UConn, but I'm going to get them at a price that's profitable if they pay off.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So I like Auburn over to beat San Diego State and get to the Sweet 16 against Big 12 tournament champion Iowa State. So
you've got Auburn advancing to the Sweet 16 against UConn.
Against UConn. I'm sorry. I made that mistake. Yeah, I lost my place. Thank you. Yeah, I've got Auburn upsetting UConn in the Sweet 16. And then I've got Auburn beating Big 12 tournament champion Iowa State to extend the Cyclones' Final Four drought since the 40s, another year. And Auburn winning the East Regional. That's what I have there. All right. I forgot the bottom half of the East bracket. I like BYU and I like Drake to beat Washington State. And then Iowa State and Drake in Omaha. Can you imagine the crowd for that?
I hope that happens. It's not my pick, but I hope that happens.
That would be, that would be a phenomenal atmosphere. I think BYU gets hot for a game or two with their 3-point shot. Illinois doesn't guard anybody at the 3-point line. Just doesn't. And that's BYU is not a team you want to play if you're not going to guard the 3-point line. So I think BYU shoots them out. And then eventually falls to Big 12 rival Iowa State. Sounds weird to say that, but to Big 12 rival Iowa State in the Sweet 16. And Auburn gets to its second Final Four under Bruce Pearl. On the other side of the bracket there in the South, I'm going to take Houston to go up against Texas A&M in the round of 32. I think the Aggies are too tough and physical for Nebraska making its first NCAA tournament under Fred Hoiberg. The Huskers are the last remaining power conference team to never win an NCAA tournament game. Northwestern broke that streak several years ago with Chris Collins. Nebraska is the last one. My 12-5 upset, I'm going to go with James Madison, one of only 4 teams, I think, to win 30-plus games. Started 14-0. Kind of just seems to be like that athletic department's year. They had a great year in football, too, remember? And I just don't think Wisconsin's very good or very athletic. I think they're a great system team. They know how to win games in January and February in the Big Ten. but I think they're going to lose in the first round to James Madison, who will take on Duke after they beat the Catamounts of Vermont. And then I think James Madison goes up against Duke and pulls the other upset. They're my double-digit team that at 34 of the last 36 years has gotten to the Sweet 16.
Yep.
James Madison is my pick this year, where they will face Houston in one of the Sweet 16s. In the bottom half of the bracket, Texas Tech a little bit different than the teams we saw under Chris Beard. They're a little bit more offensively minded, but I think they beat NC State. I think they'll probably just be out of gas after what they did in the ACC. I think Kentucky gets by Oakland, and then Kentucky beats Texas Tech. On the bottom half of the bracket, I think Florida is going to beat Boise State, who I think will beat Colorado in the first four. I like Marquette to get their star point guard back and beat Western Kentucky. I think with that star point guard back, maybe the best point guard in the country, Marquette beats Florida and then beats Kentucky back-to-back before running into rugged Houston, who spent a lot of the year ranked number one. And I think Houston advances to its second Final Four under Kelvin Sampson by beating the Eagles of Marquette. In the bottom half of the bracket, in the West, I like North Carolina and Michigan State to go up in the round of 32. And if you're North Carolina, that is not a program you want to see in the second round. Just a program that it won't be too big of a moment for them. They're used to having success in this event. Tom Izzo has the longest consecutive NCAA tournament streak in the country now. I think it's 26 years in a row. I like St. Mary's to beat Grand Canyon. I think the problem Grand Canyon has in this matchup is they want to play the same style St. Mary's does, and St. Mary's just, I think, has better players. Alabama, I think, will beat Charleston, but I wouldn't be shocked to see that be a 13-4 upset there. I'm going to take New Mexico with their backcourt to be too good and too athletic for Clemson. And then I'm going to take Baylor to get rid of Colgate in the first round. I like Nevada, very experienced team, tough, rugged guards. Steve Alford, of course, very experienced coach. They'll take on Arizona, who fired Dan Munson, Arizona beating Long Beach State, who fired Dan Munson, and then he went on and won the conference tournament and took the team to the NCAA tournament. So there you go. All right. I think Arizona beats Nevada to advance to the Sweet 16 against Baylor. I like Arizona and North Carolina. I think that's my only 1-2 Elite Eight matchup in the whole tournament. And I'm going to take Arizona to knock North Carolina out and advance to the Final Four in their home state of Phoenix. And on the other half of the bottom side of the bracket in the Midwest, this is the Purdue Invitational to me. If they can't finally do it, Aaron, this is never going to happen. It's never happening. This is the best program in college basketball to not go to a Final Four in the last 40 plus years. They have the most Big Ten championships of anybody else. This is, to me, and I've said this since the preseason, this is Virginia 2019 all over again. Lose to a 16 seed and get embarrassed, humiliated, bring everybody back, come back, win it all. I think they're going to do that. I think it starts by winning against whoever they face there in that play-in game. I like TCU. I just think it's going to be too tough and athletic for a good story. And the coach's name there in Utah State, Danny Sprinkle. But I like TCU to march on there. I think TCU will be a tough matchup for Purdue, by the way, with their athleticism in the backcourt. I think McNeese beats Gonzaga. I think Gonzaga is way overseeded watching them this year.
Yeah.
I'm going to say Kansas gets by Samford, but I'm telling you right now, if McCullers and Dickinson can't play, it might be worth it to pick Samford as an upset, just because that's still up in the air. I think Oregon ends what's been kind of a dream season for South Carolina. I just like Dana Altman, one of the best ATS coaches in the NCAA tournament, by the way. And this is one of I think there's about 5 games where the lower seeded team is favored, and that is one of them. New Mexico and Clemson, we talked about it a minute ago, is another. I'm going to take Creighton over LeBron James, almost alma mater, Akron. Texas, I think, loses to Virginia. I think Virginia is going to come in with a chip on its shoulder. Everybody, Colorado State's favored against them. I think Virginia comes in, beats Colorado State, and then beats Texas to get to the round of 32. I think Tennessee survives St. Peter's, but with Rick Barnes, it's just a matter of time before they flame out in the tournament. I think they get one more win. I think Tennessee plays Virginia's style of ball, but with better players. I think Creighton gets by Oregon and their former coach, Dana Altman. That's an interesting matchup there. I like Creighton to beat Tennessee in the Sweet 16. I like Purdue to beat Kansas in the Sweet 16. And I think Purdue advances to its first Final Four since Joe barely cared back when Jimmy Carter was still president in 1980. If they're not going to do it this year, it's just never happening. So for my Final Four, I like Auburn to beat home team, Arizona. And then I like Purdue to beat Houston, just to be too physical for them with Edey down low. And Purdue to be the first Big Ten team since 2000 Michigan State to win the national championship, fulfilling my preseason prediction and going full Virginia. Those are my picks, Aaron.
Wow, that was a ride. We'll go to mine as well. A good ride. UConn, I like that over Stetson. Northwestern over FAU. Got San Diego State over UAB. And Yale, my first upset over Auburn.
Nice.
I think the styles of play there, it's something like when you contrast teams that are really into the fast pace of play versus the slow pace of play, it's something like 80%. And so Yale wants to play really, really fast or really slow, I believe, and Auburn wants to play fast. So that's my first upset. Yale versus Auburn, Ivy League.
So you want to wreck my bracket day one?
Yeah, basically. Yeah.
Okay, I respect it.
So Yale, and by the way, I made all these picks before I asked for access to your account. So I didn't know what your picks were until I saw them myself, but I had already made my picks. Some of them mirror your picks. Some of them happen to mirror your picks. Some of them, as this one just showed, do not. I've got BYU over Duquesne in that first round game. This is going to be a chaotic bracket.
I thought about this one.
Illinois did a great job in the Big Ten tournament. They looked dominant at times, but this is another pace of play type of pick here. So Morehead State versus Illinois.
Yeah, I thought about that one
in the first round. This is going to be a chaotic bracket. I really want Drake to move on to the second round, the round of 32 against Iowa State. That would be an amazing atmosphere just about an hour and a half away for both of these teams, a little bit further for Iowa State, over in Omaha, but I've got Washington State advancing and taking on Iowa State, who gets by South Dakota State fairly easily. In the round of 32, I've got UConn over Northwestern, San Diego State over Yale. Yale's little run there ends. I've got Morehead State beating BYU again and moving on to the Sweet 16. Well, they will take on Washington State, who will defeat Iowa State. In the Sweet 16, I've got UConn going on to the Elite Eight, where they'll face Washington State, and UConn I have advancing to the Final Four. Over in the South region, I've got Houston, Texas A&M. By the way, Texas A&M versus Nebraska in both the men's and women's tournament.
We should have mentioned that.
The same week that it was announced that Trev Alberts, now Nebraska's former athletic director, he's moving to Texas A&M. Oh, come on.
Thank you for bringing that up. I totally forgot.
I was not born yesterday.
Yeah.
That's not a mistake.
That's great programming right there.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I've got Texas A&M, though. Ending Nebraska's season. I, too, have James Madison upsetting Wisconsin. I think that might be my one or two. I think that's my only 12/5 upset, if I remember correctly. And I agree, Wisconsin is just not that good. Wisconsin drops out of the first round there. Duke over the Catamounts of Vermont advances to the round of 32. Texas Tech over NC State. I agree. And also, I just think teams that kind of didn't really come out of nowhere, but really gave it all they had to win their conference tournament.
Yep.
I would like to fade those teams. Iowa State, that's kind of the same reason why I did have them advancing to the round of 32, but I think that they'll drop out as well. Moving on, Kentucky over Oakland, Florida over the winner of the play-in game, Boise State versus Colorado, and then Marquette. In the round of 32, I've got Houston. This is in the South region. Houston over Texas A&M, Duke over James Madison, Kentucky over Texas Tech, and Marquette over Florida. In the Sweet 16, I have Houston over Duke and Kentucky over Marquette for a Elite Eight matchup of Houston versus Kentucky, and I have Kentucky moving on to the Final Four. In the Western bracket, I've got North Carolina moving on. I'm not that big on Michigan State this year, and I've said as much before. I think they're one and done, or just done in the NCAA tournament. They lose to Mississippi State. I have St. Mary's over Grand Canyon for much the same reasons you did. The just pace of play with better players. Alabama over Charleston, although that one, I don't know. There's something weird.
I nearly pulled the trigger on
There's
Charleston.
something weird about that.
There.
Yeah, there's something weird about that matchup. Clemson over New Mexico, Baylor over Colgate, Dayton over Nevada, very chalky in this bracket, and Arizona over Long Beach State. In the round of 32, North Carolina over Mississippi State, St. Mary's over Alabama, Baylor over Clemson, Arizona over Dayton. Again, very chalky. I've got basically the 1 and 2 seeds in this bracket facing off in the Elite Eight for a trip to the Final Four, and I, too, have Arizona moving on. In the Midwest, I've got Purdue beating the Middle Tennessee State versus Grambling. I've got them moving on.
Montana State.
Montana State, sorry, yeah. Montana State versus Grambling. Utah State over TCU. Gonzaga, I do have them over McNeese, although I thought about doing McNeese as well. Samford, I actually have them pulling the upset in this one. Samford over Kansas because of the injury worries. I have them showing into Kansas a quick exit from the tournament. South Carolina over Oregon. Creighton over Akron. Texas over the winner of the play-in game. And Tennessee over St. Peter's, round of 32. Purdue over Utah State. Gonzaga over Samford. Creighton over South Carolina. Tennessee over Texas. I have the winner of the Tennessee-Creighton game being Tennessee, moving on to the Elite Eight, where they will face Purdue. And I have Purdue winning that Elite Eight matchup, giving me a Final Four of UConn and Arizona over on the left side. And I have UConn going on to the title game. I know there's not much value in that, but I do believe in that team. And I have Purdue making it to the final, to the championship as well, beating Kentucky. And I have UConn prevailing over Purdue. It's still going to be a successful season for Purdue, but I do have UConn going back-to-back and 141 points scored in the championship.
Hasn't been done since Billy Donovan's Florida Gators, man. So, well done.
Joakim Noah, right?
Yep.
That guy?
You're right. You got that team right on the money. You bet. Those were great. By the way, those guys could have all came back for another year. They just all went pro. Yeah. All right, we're going to take a break, come back. We'll wrap things up with our Twitter poll results and feedback of the week next. This week's Twitter poll results, we asked you which Big Ten team in an 8-9 first-round game has the best chance to win and then upset the number 1 seed in the second round of March Madness. 49% said Nebraska, which I actually agree with when you look at that matchup. I agree with that take. 36% said Michigan State. 15% said Northwestern. What do you think, Aaron?
I agree. Nebraska probably has the best chance. And they've shown, they beat Purdue earlier this year. They've shown they can stand up to some stiff competition. So that'd be quite a story for Fred Hoiberg.
Northwestern, for the first time in school history, back-to-back NCAA tournaments.
Yep.
Nebraska, first time under Fred Hoiberg. So great coaching jobs by both Fred Hoiberg and Chris Collins there, no question. All right, feedback of the week from Will Clouth, or Clue. Turning down the NIT is soft in response to Indiana and now Pittsburgh and others turning down the NIT. I completely disagree. The NIT is an un-American event. To have some playoff of also-rans, no one watches, no one attends, no one cares about. I think I've had this take going back to when I worked full-time in sports talk radio. I just think it's a weak, un-American celebration of mediocrity. In no other sport, you don't make the Stanley Cup playoffs. You don't play for the Stanley Coaster instead of the Stanley Cup. You don't make the NBA playoffs. It's not like, let's go play for Larry O'Brien's, key ring. No, you play for the Larry O'Brien Trophy or nothing. You don't make the NFL playoffs. It's not like, let's go play for Vince Lombardi's humidor. No, you're done. Okay, you should be done. No need to keep playing. No one cares. And in the era of NIL and everything else, you're going to just see guys at major schools opt out of this anyway. So I'm all in favor of teams opting out. In fact, I think you're great Americans by doing so.
So have you ever missed the playoffs in fantasy football?
Yeah.
Okay. There's no consolation ladder. Do you just stop setting your lineups?
Yeah.
You do?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Really?
I do. Yeah. I didn't make it. I'm done.
So
I'm an American. Not just that, Aaron. I'm a real American. I fight for the rights of every man. I'm a real American.
So if a group of guys who happen to play for the same team, they just wanted to get together for some exhibition action, that's un-American? And they just happen to call it the NIT?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to get together at the wire or something, fine. But, don't put it on TV and make it look like some kind of major accomplishment. No one's ever sold NIT champion gear.
Well,
you ever bought an NIT championship T-shirt?
It doesn't look like a major accomplishment anymore now that they're holding it. And Hinkle Fieldhouse, I understand it's historic. When they had it at Madison Square Garden, I was more in line with your opinion. It's like, a trip to New York for the consolation ladder, not really. Even though Iowa did make it to the Final Four in the NIT several years ago, that's making it look like too big of a deal. To me, this is just an exhibition tournament. Get some more experience for these guys. That's all. I don't really care enough about it to to make it that big of an opinion. I did have a buddy of mine.
I love this country too much to just let this slide.
I did have a buddy of mine text me who listens to this podcast, and he lives near Iowa City. And he said, where is it? He said, hey, do you want to go to the NIT game again? Because we went several years ago when Iowa was still an ascendant program. I know it's a long shot being a late game, blah, blah, blah. And I said to him, if this were an ascendant program, I'd say absolutely, because the tickets are $20. But I really don't want to invest the kind of time and energy driving 3 hours for this team that's in the NIT in year 14 of Fran McCaffrey. So I don't have that big of feelings, but I'm not going to expend any extra energy to actually. Like if this is year 2 of Fran McCaffrey, you were on the bubble, yeah, I would actually consider going to the NIT game.
You had it right. You're good.
I would actually consider that, and I might do that actually. But it's year 14, so I would have been fine if they turned it down. I just don't. I don't. It's an exhibition.
That'd have been the greatest win of the Fran McCaffrey era. They turned it down.
Yeah.
By the way, last time Iowa made it past the first weekend of the NCAA tournament.
Before I was born.
Not this century. 1999. Tom Davis' last
99.
year.
Oh, okay. So I was
Tom
6.
Davis' last time. Beat Arkansas, upset them in the second round, and went on to lose to national champion Connecticut in the Sweet 16. That's the last time.
I'm tired of Fran McCaffrey. You know, he's a nice guy, I'm sure, fiery on the court, whatever. I understand Iowa fans are afraid, or maybe the administration is afraid of doing a Todd Licklider again.
Whitest programming of all time.
And I understand.
Nick at night levels of white.
I've been wanting to do this in the offseason, is ranking Big Ten coaching jobs, both football and basketball.
We should do that.
Iowa might have the worst Big Ten basketball coaching job.
Yeah, I mean, Iowa's had a lot of wins.
They have, but it's despite it's a bad job, though.
Okay. We should do that this offseason as an
for both football, and we need to do that with resetting the conference expansion.
We put our rankings together. We do it like a point system, like the AP poll.
Sure. Yeah.
You know, and got to include the new schools too. You know, and
Northwestern might be the only program that's a worse job than Iowa in this conference.
All right. Before we go, gun to your head. Michigan's next basketball coach, do you think is going to be who? Since Ohio State, can you believe they paid that massive buyout to Chris Holtmann just to hire his assistant?
Yeah.
I mean, I know they played well down the stretch, man.
If I were the AD, I'd be so pissed at that assistant right now. You weren't supposed to do this because that kind of forced their hand. It's like you went on this massive, impressive run towards the end of the season. I can't fire you now. So
that leaves Michigan as the big job open in the Big Ten with Ohio State taken. Who do you think they hire?
I would look at Drake's coach.
Darian DeVries?
Yeah, I would look, especially if Fran McCaffrey decided to walk, I would make sure DeVries never leaves.
For people that don't know,
team.
and the reason you don't know is because of how bad Drake has been for so long. They had one great year about 10 or so years ago out of nowhere.
Adam Emenecker?
Yeah, out of absolutely nowhere. They had one great year and got to the tournament and lost on the last second shot to Western Kentucky. Mm-hmm. But for 60 years, this program, other than that, has been a graveyard. The Colorado State coach, Medved. As soon as he could get the hell out of here and take that job, he did.
Yeah, and he coached him pretty well as well.
I mean, it's just a dead end program. What Darian DeVries has done there is just unprecedented in you and I's either one of our lifetimes. What he's done there. So.
And also, I mean, it's led to more fan support of the program here in Des Moines. Drake basketball is now a miniature institution.
Why is it so hard? Because it's a really high level private institution. Yeah. They don't cut any corners at admissions. They don't even let you cut corners and keeping guys eligible. That's why, you know. So I could see it being Darian DeVries. I'm going to predict it's going to be Dusty May, the Florida Atlantic coach.
Oh, yeah.
But I could definitely see it being Darian DeVries for sure. But I'm going to predict Dusty May. All right, man. You ready for the madness?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
All right. Let's get it started. We'll be back sooner than you can expect, depending on how Big Ten teams do in this event here in the first week. For Aaron McIntyre, I'm Steve Deace. Don't forget to like, rate, subscribe, share, follow. Whether you're watching right here on YouTube or listening on iTunes or elsewhere, it'd be great if you did that. It helps us to find more Big Ten fans just like you. Follow us on Twitter, including NCAA tournament games for in-game commentary and other snotty takes in between episodes at Bigger10 on X or Twitter, at Bigger10 there. Until we see you again, enjoy the madness.